In the quiet deserts of the American Southwest, whispers travel on the wind. These stories speak of figures that move with unnatural speed, take the form of coyotes or owls, and appear at the edges of campfires and dreams. They are said to watch from the shadows with eyes that do not belong, wearing the stolen faces of beasts or even people. They are called Skinwalkers. Today, the word appears in horror films, online threads, and late-night campfire stories. But its true meaning comes from a much older and more serious place. Within the traditions of the Diné people, Skinwalkers are not just shapeshifters. They are individuals who have committed deep spiritual violations and chosen a darker path. This path is marked by secrecy, imbalance, and the betrayal of the community's trust. It is said that such a person may take the form of animals, move in unnatural ways, or cause harm without ever being seen. But more than anything, the Skinwalker symbolizes a deep break with the Diné way of life. That way of life is centered on harmony, healing, and respect for the natural world. Much of what outsiders believe about Skinwalkers is built on misunderstanding. Over time, this belief has been warped by Hollywood, sensational media, and internet folklore. The real story is not about monsters hiding in the shadows. It is about sacred traditions, cultural respect, and the consequences of twisting another people's beliefs into entertainment. So how did we get here? Why is this word used so casually in popular culture when it is spoken with such caution within the Navajo Nation? And what does this reveal about the way we treat stories that are not our own? This documentary will explore the deeper truth. It will look at the origins of the Skinwalker story, the cultural values behind it, and the long history of how those meanings have been lost or changed. We are not here to provoke fear. We are here to understand. Because sometimes the most haunting thing is not what waits in the dark. It is the way we have chosen to see it. Dawn breaks over the red mesas of the American Southwest. Pale light rolls across buttes and arroyos, revealing a landscape that feels both empty and deeply lived in. This land is home to the Diné, the people, whose nation today stretches across parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah. At nearly 27,000 square miles, it is the largest indigenous homeland within the United States. From high desert plateaus to forested mountain edges, every canyon and waterhole carries stories that tie families to place. Language is the first key to those stories. Diné Bizad, the Navajo language, expresses ideas that English can only approximate. One guiding principle is the pursuit of balance and beauty in daily life. English speakers often translate that principle simply as harmony. A person seeks right relations with family, with the land, and with the unseen world. When balance is maintained, life moves forward with a sense of well-being. When balance is broken, illness, conflict, and fear can take hold. Ceremonies, songs, and prayers aim to restore the order that keeps people, animals, and land in step with one another. Alongside healing traditions, Diné teachings acknowledge the possibility that a person can choose a darker path. Wrongdoing is not blamed on distant demons. It is framed as a decision by a human being who turns spiritual knowledge towards selfish or harmful ends. Such a person breaks trust with relatives, with the earth, and with the creative powers that sustain life. Stories of witches emerge from this moral landscape. They are warnings about the cost of abandoning responsibility, not myths about random monsters. Because words themselves are considered powerful, speaking too freely of witches carries risk. Elders caution children not to whistle at night, not to linger in lonely places after dark, and not to mention certain topics outside safe daylight conversations. These rules protect on multiple levels. Spiritually, they are believed to limit unwanted attention. Socially, they guard against rumors that can spread panic or spark accusations. In a tight-knit community, a careless statement might spiral, so silence becomes a form of protection. This careful boundary means that outsiders have learned about Diné witchcraft only through fragments. A trader's journal, an anthropologist's notebook, or a novelist's plot device might preserve a glimpse, but the full context often remains hidden. Over time, partial information invites speculation. A figure rooted in DNA ethics turns into a roaming desert creature in popular imagination. The original lessons about responsibility and kinship fade, replaced by thrill-seeking folklore. To rebuild context, we turn first to DNA voices that have chosen to publish. Navajo authors describe how balance and imbalance shaped community survival during the most difficult chapters of history. In the 1860s, US forces forced thousands of DNA people on the long walk to Bosque Redondo, nearly 400 miles east. The camp there held disease, hunger, and mourning. Oral histories recall that accusations of witchcraft rose sharply in that era, fueled by grief and uncertainty. Neighbors looked for explanations when crops failed or children fell sick. Sometimes suspicion led to violence. These events are not footnotes to a spooky tale. They are part of real social stress and trauma. Place itself reinforces the teaching. Certain rock formations, old hogans, or remote stretches of highway collect cautionary reputation over generations. A grandparent may warn, "Do not travel this canyon alone at night." Whether or not danger is truly present, the warning encourages respect for land and prudence in behavior. The landscape becomes both memory and moral reminder. Understanding the difference between open and closed knowledge is crucial. Open knowledge includes public speeches, books by Diné writers, newspaper articles, and stories shared at cultural events. Closed knowledge lives in ceremonies, family lines, and the teachings of healers. It is protected out of respect and out of care for community safety. Our exploration remains within the open circle. We will not reveal the structure of chants, the content of sacred bundles, or the details elders guard for good reason. Protecting those boundaries is not only ethical, it keeps the story true to its purpose. A final note on terminology. English often labels any tale of supernatural wrongdoing among the Diné as a Skinwalker story. In fact, traditional teachings draw careful lines among different kinds of witches, each with its own role and taboo. Outsider shorthand collapses those distinctions, while later sections will examine how that collapse happened. For now, it is enough to remember that precision matters. By respecting the limits of what can be said, we avoid turning complex teachings into a single monster mask. With land, language, and values in view, we are ready to advance. Next, we will offer a careful definition of what outsiders call the Skinwalker, showing how the idea fits into a broader Diné worldview without crossing into closed territory. Before we describe the figure most outsiders call a Skinwalker, we begin with care. Within Diné teachings, witchcraft is not a curiosity. It is the deliberate misuse of power that should serve healing and balance. The particular witch known as Ye Naudlushii, often translated as Skinwalker, is said to break the deepest rules of family loyalty and ceremonial conduct. Because those rules are serious, details of how one might cross them are not ours to repeat. What can be shared in public comes from Diné writers, from cautious scholars, and from statements made for education, never from private instruction. At a high level, stories agree on 4 traits. First, the Skinwalker is a human being, not a spirit, not an animal, but a person who chooses wrongdoing. Second, that choice grants the witch certain feared abilities, most famously, the power to appear as a 4-legged creature. Coyotes, wolves, foxes, owls, and crows are the most common forms reported. Third, the witch is said to move with uncanny speed and stealth, traveling at night across distances no ordinary person could cover. Fourth, the witch can mimic sounds, imitating voices of loved ones or cries for help, luring a victim into the open. These points surface again and again in public stories, whether they come from Diné speakers, early anthropologists, or modern journalists. It is just as important to say what these stories do not teach. They do not describe a random curse. Nothing in the open record suggests a person can stumble into being a skinwalker by accident. The harm begins with intent. Nor do the stories frame the witch as an eternal beast that lives for centuries. Each telling locates the danger in the moral realm, not in biology. Power does not flow from fangs or claws. It flows from a choice to betray family bonds and sacred law. To understand that contrast, consider the role of the singer, often called a medicine man in English. A singer trains for years to guide ceremonies that restore balance when illness or misfortune strikes. Healing songs, sand paintings, and prayers are carried out for the good of the patient and the community. Private knowledge of plants, songs, and symbols supports that purpose. A witch, by contrast, is said to twist similar knowledge toward envy, revenge, or greed. The difference is not in technique alone. It is in the intention behind each act. Where one seeks renewal, the other seeks control. Stories also stress that a witch cannot thrive unless people allow division to take root. Suspicion, jealousy, and anger create openings for mischief. In that sense, tales of skinwalkers serve as moral mirrors. They warn listeners that community health depends on mutual responsibility. A child hears the tale and learns more than fear of a monster. The child learns that choices have echoes, that loyalty protects, and that secrecy can shelter wrongdoing. Public accounts sometimes mention a substance called corpse powder or bone pellets said to be used by witches. The full recipe and ritual context are closed knowledge. What the open record does say is that Dine people view the dead body as a potent source of both contamination and danger. Using remains for harm would be an extreme violation of respect for the deceased. By hinting at such violations, stories underline how far the witch has strayed from accepted norms. Because the line between healer and witch can look like the line between use and abuse of sacred power, outsiders have often misunderstood both roles. Early frontier writers sometimes labeled any ceremonial leader as a witch, flattening complexity into a single stereotype. Later, popular media turned the skinwalker into a supernatural creature, more akin to a werewolf or a science fiction alien. This simplification erases the ethical framework at the heart of the teaching. Holding on to that framework is essential if we hope to understand why Diné families treat the subject with caution and why certain words are avoided after dark. A final note on terminology. Within Diné, thought there are other categories of witchcraft, each distinct, each with its own taboos. Some refer to curses planted with intent, others to frenzied acts carried out in fits of jealousy or despair. Public sources rarely agree on every label, and modern English accounts often blur them together. Rather than multiply unfamiliar terms, this script uses the English word witch when speaking generally, and uses skinwalker only when a source clearly indicates the witch who moves as an animal. Precision helps us respect boundaries and keeps rumor from spreading unchecked. With a careful definition in place, we now turn to the written trail left by outsiders who tried to record what they heard. Their notes, publications, and sometimes sensational headlines shaped global ideas about the skinwalker. To see how those ideas grew, we begin in the late 19th century. The first written hints of Diné witchcraft appear in military journals and missionary letters of the 1850s and 1860s. Officers stationed near Diné camps noted beliefs in bad medicine, usually without detail and often with a tone of dismissal. These fragments tell us more about outsider bias than about the belief itself. Yet they mark the moment when private teachings brushed against a colonial gaze. A more substantial record comes from Washington Matthews, a U.S. Army surgeon who served at Fort Wingate in the 1880s. Matthews spoke Diné Bizarre and earned rare trust among some families. His 1897 monograph on Navajo mythology includes references to witches who go on all fours. Matthews admits his informants withheld specifics of harmful rites. Even so, his text preserves a moment when oral tradition met paper. He records that witchcraft was said to exist since the first emergence of the people into this world, placing wrongdoing inside the sacred timeline, not outside it. Around the same period, Diné society endured the Long Walk, the forced relocation to Bosque Redondo in 1864. Starvation, disease, and despair followed. Oral histories describe witchcraft accusations rising during that exile and the years after the return home. In 1878, a wave of fear led to the killing of dozens suspected of witchcraft. Later writers dubbed this episode the Navajo Witch Purge. Documentation is thin, but both Diné storytellers and non-native journalists agree on the outcome: real deaths in response to perceived spiritual threat. The purge illustrates how seriously these beliefs can affect community life, and it warns us not to treat the topic as fantasy. Academic focus deepened in the early 20th century. Ethnologist Franciscan Father Berard Hiley recorded ceremonial chants and noted passing references to witches, though he avoided explicit descriptions. His Catholic lens colored his interpretations, framing Diné cosmology as a struggle between Christian-like good and evil, a simplification that Diné scholars later challenged. The most influential outsider text remains anthropologist Clyde Cluckhon's Navajo Witchcraft, published in 1944. Cluckhon gathered interviews over a decade, usually conducted in daylight, often after long negotiations. He classified 4 types of witchcraft based on the alleged method of harm, with the Skinwalker falling under what he called the witchery way. Cluckhon's work is detailed, but it is also a product of its time. He sometimes assumed silence meant ignorance rather than voluntary protection. He also included graphic speculation on initiation rites, material that Diné writers argue should never have been printed. Modern scholars cite Cluckhon heavily, yet most add caveats about context and consent. Parallel to academic work, journalists and regional historians published accounts that blended observation with rumor. Trading post owners wrote memoirs filled with dramatic tales of nighttime horse tracks ending in human footprints. Highway patrol stories circulated. A trooper sees a wolf keeping pace with his cruiser, fires his revolver, and later finds an injured suspect in human form. Evidence for these episodes remains anecdotal, but the stories spread far beyond Diné homelands, feeding the burgeoning pulp market for frontier mysteries. By the mid-20th century, a pattern had formed. Academics produced dense monographs for limited audiences. Local newspapers offered short, sensational pieces. Neither fully captured the Diné perspective. That gap widened as popular culture entered the scene. In 1960, writer Frank Waters included witch themes in The Man Who Killed the Deer, though he wrote about Pueblo people. Readers often confused tribal contexts, blending Pueblo, Apache, and Diné stories into a single Southwest occult stew. The tipping point for mainstream awareness arrived in 1986 with Tony Hillerman's crime novel Skinwalkers. Hillerman, a non-native author long respected for careful research, centered his plot on a Navajo detective investigating murders linked to witchcraft. He sought advice from Diné consultants and avoided direct ritual detail. Yet his title alone planted the word Skinwalker in popular vocabulary. The best-selling book and its later television adaptation introduced millions to the concept, though many viewers assumed the material was pure fiction. Academic reaction to Hillerman was mixed. Some praised his respectful tone. Others worried that any mention of witchcraft in entertainment disrespected Diné protocols. Hillerman's success, however, revealed a growing appetite for native horror among non-native readers. The market soon offered less careful treatments. Magazines ran articles with titles like Werewolves of the Navajo Night, collapsing complex teachings into Halloween thrills. During the 1990s, paranormal media seized on the word Skinwalker. Investigators covering unexplained events in Utah's Uinta Basin adopted the term for a ranch reputedly plagued by glowing wolves and UFOs. The ranch is far from Diné territory, yet the borrowed label stuck. National radio shows repeated the stories, divorcing skinwalkers from Diné history entirely. Online forums of the early 2000s accelerated the split. Creepypasta sites hosted user-written horror in which skinwalkers roam Appalachia, mimic children's voices in suburban backyards, or stalk campers in every US forest. These tales rarely mentioned Diné culture at all. The skinwalker became a blank mask for shapeshifter fear, a role once filled by werewolves in European lore. Scholars watching this trend published cautionary essays. Diné authors wrote blog posts warning that careless repetition ignores living beliefs and encourages intrusive curiosity tourism. Academic folklorists noted that internet myth cycles can produce apparent first-person testimony that is actually fiction. Yet the snowball rolled on, powered by algorithms that reward clicks over context. Today, the earliest written sources stand in stark contrast to social media storm cycles. Matthews's careful glosses and Cluckhon's field notes acknowledge gaps and hesitations. Modern message boards present confident statements about how to detect or defeat a skinwalker, most of which have no basis in Diné teaching. For a responsible documentary, the lesson is clear. Trace every claim to its first print or oral citation. Mark where silence, caution, or contradiction appears. Accept that uncertainty is part of honest inquiry. Having followed the paper trail, we now circle back to the community level, asking how these beliefs function within Diné life and how rumor can both protect and endanger. Within Diné communities, stories about witches operate on many levels at once. They serve as moral instruction, as warnings against isolation, and as explanations for unexplained harm. At the same time, they can become weapons of accusation if fear overrides evidence. Understanding this dual potential is essential to any fair telling. Begin with the moral thread. Children learn early that the strongest shield against danger is right behavior. Honor parents, help elders, respect the land, keep promises. Tales of a witch who chose the opposite path show the cost of breaking those norms. The skinwalker is not admired for power. The witch is pitied or feared as someone who traded belonging for brief advantage. In that sense, the story resembles cautionary legends worldwide. It is a compass pointing back to communal values. Next, the practical thread. Many Diné families live in rural areas where nights are quiet and distances vast. A sudden illness, a lost sheep, or a barn door found open in the morning can raise questions. Before modern veterinary medicine or germ theory reached the reservation, witchcraft offered one possible answer. Even today, some elders may frame a streak of misfortune as imbalance caused by hostile intent. Whether literal or metaphorical, the idea urges families to look after each other. Keeping community bonds strong is itself a protective act. Silence plays its role. By discouraging casual talk, elders reduce false alarms. A neighbor who dislikes the reclusive man on the ridge might be tempted to label him a witch. Community norms push back. Accusations require evidence and careful deliberation. That restraint is not foolproof, as the 1878 witch purge shows, but it tempers gossip most of the time. In a sense, the taboo on naming witches after dark functions like a social breaker switch, preventing panic from spreading through the night. Healing ceremonies contribute another layer. When someone believes harm has come from witchcraft, a ceremonial leader may be asked to diagnose the cause and restore balance. The specifics are private, yet the public outcome is visible. The family gathers, songs are sung, stories retold, and the patient is symbolically placed back in the web of relationships. Even if an outsider doubts the spiritual mechanics, the psychological and social effects are clear. The individual feels cared for, The family reaffirms unity, and tension eases. Yet the same belief that knits a community together can tear it apart when fear escalates. Historians link spikes in witchcraft accusations to periods of famine, disease, or rapid social change. The witch purge followed years of imprisonment and loss. Anthropologists note smaller flare-ups during 20th century livestock reductions or land disputes when envy and suspicion ran high. Witchcraft becomes a language to express stress, but if words turn into mob action, tragedy can follow. Modern communications add fresh complications. Rumor that once traveled by whispered firelight can now circle the globe in seconds. A sensational video of an alleged Skinwalker sighting attracts millions of views. Some commenters treat it as proof, others as entertainment. Meanwhile, Diné residents may face curious strangers roaming back roads at midnight, seeking thrills, ignoring posted signs, and breaking the quiet that stories were meant to preserve. What began as a protective taboo flips into a magnet for trespass. Diné writers and community leaders have responded in different ways. Some urge silence, fearing that any attention invites more intrusion. Others argue that responsible education can reduce harms by replacing fantasy with fact. Cultural consultants on film and television projects sometimes advise producers to omit the Skinwalker entirely, believing no depiction can balance accuracy with safety. The choice often rests on circumstance. Where rumor is minimal, silence works. Where sensational media already dominates, careful correction may do less harm than withdrawal. Inside families, the stories persist, adapted for new times. Teens trade text messages instead of campfire whispers. Grandparents remind them not to laugh too loudly at the idea, because ridicule can wound belief as sharply as exploitation. In some households, the tale of the witch is told not to frighten, but to remind listeners that every person holds the choice between healing and harm. For the wider audience of this documentary, the takeaway is simple. Curiosity is natural, but respect must guide it. Resist the temptation to treat living beliefs as props. Give silence the honor it is due. When a Diné friend turns aside a question, understand that the refusal is an act of care, not secrecy for secrecy's sake. Communities protect knowledge because knowledge has weight. As we move forward, we will examine a handful of public stories already in circulation to see what they reveal and what they obscure. We will offer them not as final proof, but as windows into the way narrative, fear, and geography interact. Each story carries echoes of the moral and social threads we have just traced. Listening closely, we may hear how warnings against betrayal, isolation, and imbalance continue to shape life on the high desert. With that in mind, we step into the public record of encounters, always keeping one ear tuned to the silence behind the words. From oral narrative to printed page, only a handful of first-person accounts of skinwalkers have entered the public sphere with a traceable source. Each was placed on record by someone willing to risk criticism, and each must be weighed with caution. We include 4 such moments because they illustrate patterns rather than prove any single claim. Our first story dates back to 1921, centered around a trading post midnight watch. A Navajo trader named Sam Day kept a nightly log while minding his post near Tuba City. One winter night, he recorded hearing hoofbeats circle the corral, though every horse stood tethered inside. Stepping out with a kerosene lamp, he saw what he called a large wolf backing away on 2 legs. No tracks appeared at dawn. Day told his Diné neighbors, who advised him to keep quiet and increase his ceremonial protection. His short note survives in a regional archive. The entry does not name a culprit. It shows only that unexplained events moved a mixed community to caution rather than to pursuit. Our second story brings us to 1944. During wartime ration patrols, a Navajo police officer named Daniel Tosi drove the lonely stretch between Chinle and Shiprock. He later told an interviewer that a tall coyote kept pace beside his government truck at over 50 miles an hour. When he braked, so did the animal. When he accelerated, it blurred back into view. Sosi drew his revolver, but as he steadied the shot, he felt what he called a warning in his gut and chose not to fire. He finished the run, filed his report, and added a single line: "No citation issued. Matter closed." Years later, he said the decision was about respect. If he had misread the moment and it was nothing more than an ordinary coyote, he risked wasteful violence. If it was worse, a bullet would not solve the deeper cause. The third story is centered around a schoolhouse in the early 1900s. Margaret Nez, a Diné boarding school nurse, published a memoir in the early 90s. One chapter recounts a stormy night in the 60s when the generator failed. As she checked dorm rooms, children whispered that a skinwalker waited outside. Lightning revealed a dark figure pressed against the glass, eyes reflecting light unnaturally. Nez described rallying the staff, calming the students, and leading a dawn prayer before classes resumed. The memoir omits any claim of pursuit or capture. Instead, it focuses on the discipline of steady care under fear, a lesson Nez hoped young readers would carry. A more modern story occurs in the year 2000. In the new millennium, 2 Navajo rangers opened a file labeled "Unexplained Animal Incidents" after a wave of livestock deaths on remote allotments. According to interviews later aired on public radio, the rangers documented tracks that changed from hoof to bare human footprints over a rocky slope. Rather than declare an occult cause, they photographed the prints, confirmed livestock predation patterns, and advised herders to strengthen gates. One ranger stated on record that belief was a factor in community anxiety, so their duty was to present clear evidence first. The official report lists no suspect, human or otherwise. Taken together, these accounts show a consistent thread. Unusual events spark fear. Fear calls old teachings to mind, and community members choose protective action grounded in restraint. Even when witnesses believe they have met a witch, the response leans towards ceremony, vigilance, or quiet repair rather than violent confrontation. What each story omits speaks just as loudly. No detail of ritual, no step-by-step countermeasure, no boast of a kill. Silence marks the boundary between what is safe to share and what must remain inside the circle. Narratively, these public stories also reveal how setting shapes retelling. The Trading Post story passes through ledger paper, the Ranger case through modern audio. As technology changes, so does reach. An event once known to a few dozen listeners can now reach millions. That widening audience raises the stakes for accuracy and respect. It is one thing for a community to tell a cautionary tale among relatives. It is another for a global feed to replay the same tale as a spooky thrill. We carry these stories forward, not to prove the existence of a shapeshifter, but to show how belief functions on the ground and how restraint can coexist with genuine fear. With that grounding, we now step into the louder realm of mass media, where rumor often drowns nuance. When the word Skinwalker left Diné territory and entered global pop culture, it picked up baggage. Films, reality shows, and internet forums layered new traits onto the figure, sometimes borrowing from completely different traditions. Sorting fact from fiction is part of respectful storytelling. Here are 5 common misconceptions and the corrections that keep the narrative honest. Misconception 1. Skinwalkers are cursed victims. Many online sources describe a tragic soul doomed by another's spell, similar to European werewolf lore. Diné teachings say the opposite. A skinwalker is a person who chooses wrongdoing. The tragedy lies not in victimhood, but in willful betrayal. Shifting blame from choice to curse erases the moral lesson about responsibility. Misconception 2. Silver bullets or white ash bullets are the only defense. Movies favor neat solutions. In public, Diné accounts, no universal weapon is promised. Some stories mention ash used in protection ceremonies, but none offer a hunting guide. More often, protection comes through ceremony, prayer, and communal unity, not through firepower. Misconception 3. Skinwalkers roam every forest in North America. The internet now hosts alleged sightings from Maine to Oregon. Most repeat eerie features: a deer standing on two legs, a voice calling from the tree line, distorted human speech. These stories follow narrative patterns popular on horror forums. While fear is real to the storyteller, the cultural frame is missing. Without Diné context, the term skinwalker becomes a generic label for scary thing in the dark, a use that disconnects it from Diné life. Misconception 4. Skinwalkers are identical to the Wendigo of the northern woodlands. Both legends involve a human turning monstrous, yet their roots differ. The Wendigo arises from Algonquian warnings against cannibalism during famine. The Skinwalker arises from Diné teachings about deliberate ritual transgression and misuse of power. Collapsing the two flattens distinct histories and lessons into a single indigenous stereotype. Misconception 5. Any mention of skinwalkers by non-natives is forbidden. Respectful discussion is possible when guided by indigenous voices and clear boundaries. Diné scholars, authors, and cultural educators publish works intended for public reading precisely to replace rumor with informed context. The line is crossed only when private ceremony, mockery, or commercialization enters the frame without consent. Why do these misconceptions take hold? Speed and repetition. A single sensational post rewarded with likes spawns copies. Search engines surface the most engaging version, not the most accurate. Over time, the louder story overwrites the quieter one. For the Diné person who sees their belief turned into viral content, the effect can be exhausting. It invites thrill seekers to community roads at night, triggers insensitive questions in classrooms, and can even overshadow pressing issues like water rights or language preservation. Yet the internet also hosts corrective voices. Diné users have posted brief statements. "We do not speak lightly about witches. Please stop using our story as a prop." These corrections often receive fewer views than the thrill videos, but they stand as beacons for those who wish to learn responsibly. Academic articles are one click away, though they rarely dominate a feed. Responsibility begins when creators choose to link back to those sources, slowing the rumor mill by replacing mystery with context. For this documentary, each myth becomes an opportunity. Instead of cinematic shootouts, we highlight how protection centers on communal solidarity. Instead of roaming monsters in every woodland, we explain how the story belongs to a specific land and people. Instead of lumping legends together, we respect cultural borders. And instead of silence born of avoidance, we model informed engagement led by indigenous guidance. As we leave the noise of internet lore, our view widens beyond a single tradition. A short comparative glance helps clarify what makes the Diné framing distinct, while also showing that many peoples grapple with the idea of shape-shifting witchcraft. Shape-shifting witches appear in stories worldwide. Leopard men in West Africa were cats in Southeast Asia, jaguar sorcerers in Mesoamerica. In the American Southwest, neighboring nations hold distinct beliefs that sometimes echo, sometimes diverge. Among the Hopi, whispers speak of Powaka, a witch who can deploy harmful rites such as stealing a person's good fortune. The Powaka may seek animal allies, yet Hopi accounts focus less on physical transformation and more on mental influence. The Hopi response centers on communal ceremony to reaffirm order, similar in spirit to Diné practice, but different in detail and purpose. Apache traditions include tales of witches who cover long distances under cover of darkness. Some stories describe masked dancers turning into animals, Others speak of human figures gaining owl-like sight. These accounts share the night setting familiar to Diné stories, but Apache cosmology frames the moral lesson differently, grounding it in clan obligations unique to Apache life. To the north, Ute stories reference Navajo witches in a historical context. During conflicts in the 19th century, some Ute families believed enemy witches could slip across borders under animal disguise. This belief informed fears long after open hostilities ended. It is a cross-cultural memory rather than an independent witch archetype. Farther north still, Algonquian nations caution against the Wendigo, a monster born from cannibalistic despair. While settlers sometimes equated Wendigo stories with werewolves, the core lesson is about hunger, winter hardship, and spiritual imbalance brought by consumption. The path to monstrosity is desperation, not chosen ritual. Why draw these boundaries? Each tradition addresses a different communal anxiety. Diné teachings emphasize responsibility and deliberate betrayal. Hopi focus on psychic theft, Apache on clan protection, Wendigo stories on survival ethics. Collapsing them into one figure weakens every lesson. Respect grows when we see the specificity that roots each tale in its own ground. With distinctions made, we return to the present moment to ask how best to handle living beliefs in an age of instant sharing. Curiosity marches faster than caution, and ethics must keep pace. For viewers who feel called to learn responsibly, practical steps exist. Seek museums that feature Navajo art and history, such as the Navajo Nation Museum in Window Rock, or regional institutions with Diné curated exhibits. Read works by Navajo authors whose stories address tradition in their own voice. Attend public talks when offered, and follow posted guidelines when traveling tribal roads. Acts of respect accumulate, turning curiosity into allyship. The internet does offer some benefits. Diné creators now post language lessons, weaving tutorials, and historical podcasts. Supporting these channels counters the algorithmic tilt toward horror clickbait. Donating to scholarship funds or language nests strengthens the infrastructure that keeps stories alive on indigenous terms. Ethics is rarely dramatic, yet it shapes every frame of our narrative. By centering respect, we help protect the communities we wish to understand, and we model a path for future storytellers. The next step is to bring our journey full circle, returning to the land where shadows lengthen and lessons endure. Evening returns to the mesas. Long light burns on sandstone towers, then slips away, leaving the land under a quilt of deep blue. Somewhere a sheepdog calls, a reminder that life moves on its ordinary path. The stories we have traced tonight, however strange, are woven into days like this, into herding, into family meals, into quiet acts of care. We set out asking how a Diné teaching became a worldwide symbol of terror. We found a lineage of belief shaped by moral choice, community protection, and respect for boundaries. We watched how limited notes scribbled in field journals grew into novels, then into internet legends stripped of context. We heard how silence itself can be a shield, and how outsiders can either honor that shield or hammer against it. The figure of the witch who walks on four legs remains powerful not because of claws or speed, but because it names the price of forsaking kinship. In a world where many bonds feel fragile, that reminder carries weight. The lesson reaches beyond any one culture. What we choose to do with knowledge, power, and community defines who we become. As the desert night deepens, it is time to close the circle. We leave with gratitude to the Diné authors, scholars, and elders who placed guidance in the public domain. May their generosity guide our curiosity. For those who wish to walk further, we offer resources in the description below. Travel well, listen closely, and remember that some stories live best in respectful silence. Thank you for joining this exploration of Diné teachings and the many roads the Skinwalker story has traveled. written and narrated by Forgotten Lore. Research consultation drawn from indigenous authors, peer-reviewed scholarship, and public archives. Special thanks to Dine writers, whose published works illuminated this path. Additional thanks to museums and libraries preserving Navajo history for future generations. If this documentary brought value, consider subscribing and sharing with thoughtful viewers. Your support helps us produce further episodes rooted in care and accuracy.